In Burkina Faso, a story unfolded that stunned the world. What began as a terrifying crisis soon transformed into one of the most unexpected projects in modern Africa. Villages were overrun by snakes. Farmers woke up to find their fields crawling with vipers. Children could no longer walk to school safely. Hospitals overflowed with snakebite victims, and the Ministry of Health declared a national emergency. Newspapers called it the pandemic of venom. Fear swept across the nation. But instead of ordering mass exterminations, President Ibrahim Traoré asked a radical question: what if this isn't a curse, but a resource? To the shock of his ministers, he announced a national program to capture, farm, and breed snakes. The idea sounded insane, yet Traoré had studied models from Asia and Latin America. He knew the truth: snake venom is one of the most valuable substances on Earth, worth thousands of dollars per gram for use in vaccines and life-saving antivenoms. Snake meat is a delicacy in Asia, rich in protein. And snake skin? A luxury in Paris and Milan, crafted into high-end handbags and shoes. What once looked like a nightmare could be the foundation of a billion-dollar industry. Traoré's plan turned fear into opportunity. Villagers were hired to capture wild snakes, transforming panic into steady employment. Traditional snake hunters, once ignored, suddenly became key workers in the new economy. Universities opened labs to safely extract venom. Farmers were trained to raise non-lethal species for meat and leather. The results were immediate. Deaths from snakebites dropped as Burkina Faso produced its own antivenom. International pharmaceutical companies rushed in to buy venom. Snake meat was packaged and sold locally and abroad. Women's cooperatives led the way in preparing products for export. Communities that once burned fields to drive snakes away now saw each serpent as a source of income. Fear turned into pride. At first, foreign media mocked the project, calling it Traoré's reptile circus. But as millions of dollars began flowing into the economy, the laughter stopped. Burkina Faso had done the unthinkable. It had turned one of nature's greatest fears into a symbol of resilience and prosperity. Ibrahim Traoré put it in simple but unforgettable words: Africa must stop seeing itself as cursed. Every crisis is an opportunity. Even venom can become medicine. Even snakes can feed our people. What began as a desperate response to a terrifying wave of snakes quickly became one of the boldest economic experiments in Africa. At first, fear was everywhere. Mothers refused to let children out of the house. Farmers abandoned their fields. Elders whispered that the land itself was cursed. But as the government rolled out the National Serpent Project, things began to change. The first step was education. Teams of biologists and veterinarians traveled from village to village, teaching people how to handle snakes safely. They demonstrated how venom could be extracted without killing the animal, and how meat and leather could be processed under clean, modern conditions. At first, villagers kept their distance. But when the government began paying cash for each live snake delivered to collection centers, fear turned into curiosity. Within weeks, snake catching became a thriving trade. Families who once fled at the sight of a viper now pursued them with protective gear, because every snake meant another chance to survive and prosper. Factories sprang up across the country, processing meat, extracting venom, and preparing hides for export. Thousands of jobs appeared almost overnight. For young people, snake farming turned into an unexpected career path. Schools even launched snake farming clubs, where children learned biology alongside practical skills. A new generation grew up not fearing snakes, but studying them with pride. Women, too, found new power. Cooperatives that once focused only on shea butter or small farming were given contracts to clean and package snake meat. Suddenly, women had a direct share in a global export market. Their earnings went toward school fees, healthcare, and new businesses. For many, it was the first time they felt their work directly shaped the nation's future. The psychology of the country shifted. Snakes had once symbolized death. Villages often burned entire fields just to drive them away. Now, murals in Ouagadougou showed serpents not as threats but as protectors of national wealth. Festivals celebrated the serpent harvest, where youth performed dances inspired by snake movements. What was once an omen of doom had become a symbol of resilience. The environmental impact was just as profound. In the past, people used chemicals and fire to destroy snakes, damaging ecosystems in the process. Controlled farming stopped the destruction, protected biodiversity, and even reduced pressure on cattle grazing, slowing desertification. Public health was transformed too. Snake bites, once among the leading causes of death in rural areas, were now manageable. Burkina Faso produced its own anti-venom, ending reliance on expensive imports. Mortality rates dropped sharply. The venom that once killed was now saving lives. President Traoré used this transformation to deliver a powerful message. We are no longer victims of nature. We are masters of it. What others call a curse, Burkina Faso calls capital. That message resonated deeply. Citizens no longer waited for foreign aid. Instead, they built industries from the very challenges nature threw at them, even snakes. The international community could not ignore it. Pharmaceutical giants rushed to sign contracts for venom supplies, critical for life-saving drugs, painkillers, and even experimental cancer treatments. Luxury fashion houses in Paris and Milan lined up for exclusive rights to snake leather. But unlike the colonial past, Burkina Faso refused to export raw materials for pennies. Every deal came with conditions. Processing plants had to be built locally, technology had to be transferred, and Burkinabe scientists had to be trained. The wealth stayed in the country. Jobs, profits, and knowledge remained in the hands of its people. Perhaps the most powerful impact was psychological. For generations, Burkina Faso was told it was too poor, too dry, too cursed to rise. Traoré shattered that belief. Standing before a cheering crowd in Ouagadougou, he declared, "If we can farm venom, we can farm anything." And the people believed him. They began to see every challenge, whether drought, pests, or poverty, not as a curse, but as an untapped opportunity. By the second year, the transformation was visible everywhere. Villages that once lived in fear now thrived. Children carried snake protein biscuits to school. Women earned money from leather exports. Hospitals stocked anti-venom proudly labeled, "Made in Burkina Faso." By the third year, Burkina Faso had become the world's largest producer of snake venom. International contracts stretched from Switzerland to Japan. The World Health Organization hailed the achievement as historic, solving a global shortage of anti-venom and saving thousands of lives each year. And through it all, President Ibrahim Traoré stood tall, not just as a leader, but as the man who turned terror into triumph. The snake, once feared as a curse, had become the crown jewel of a nation's rebirth. The leather industry was the next to rise. What had once been discarded or sold for pennies, snakeskins, suddenly became luxury materials. Italian fashion houses placed massive orders for handbags and shoes. French designers marketed snake leather jackets as the next exotic trend. But President Traoré refused to let Burkina Faso remain just a supplier of raw hides. Local tanneries and fashion workshops were built. Young artisans were trained to create high-end products. Within 2 years, made in Burkina Faso handbags walked the runways of Paris and Milan. Villages that once burned snakes in fear were now supplying leather to luxury boutiques. Snake meat, too, found new markets. In China and Southeast Asia, where it is prized both as a delicacy and a medicinal food, demand exploded. Restaurants in Beijing proudly served Burkina python stew. To meet strict global standards, the country built modern processing plants certified for export. What was once seen as a dangerous pest now sat on tables thousands of miles away. The numbers were staggering. By the fourth year, combined revenues from venom, meat, and leather had surpassed $1.5 billion annually, nearly doubling Burkina Faso's GDP. Rural jobs multiplied, poverty fell, and migration slowed. Farmers who once prayed only for rain now prayed for healthy snakes, because their livelihoods depended on them. But beyond the money was power. Control over the world's venom supply gave Burkina Faso leverage in global politics. When Western nations criticized Traoré's policies or threatened sanctions, he calmly reminded them, "Your hospitals need our venom." In a world where medical shortages could spark crisis, Burkina Faso had become indispensable. At a global health summit in Geneva, Traoré captured the moment with one line that stunned the audience. For centuries, Africa was bitten and left to die. Today, Africa produces the cure. The South gave him a standing ovation. The West sat in uneasy silence. Burkina Faso was no longer a passive recipient of aid, it was a strategic supplier of life-saving medicine. And the ripple effect spread. Inspired by this model, Mali, Niger, and Chad began exploring snake farming of their own, often with guidance from Ouagadougou. Together, they formed a new alliance, the Venom Corridor, to coordinate production and set prices. For the first time in modern history, African nations were not undercutting each other, but uniting around a shared resource. At home, the wealth was reinvested. Villages built clinics proudly labeled "funded by Serpent exports." Schools taught biology in classrooms decorated with snake diagrams. Women's cooperatives, once limited to small trade, now managed million-dollar businesses supplying the fashion and food industries. The psychological shift was just as profound as the economic one. Burkina Faso no longer saw itself as cursed by nature, but blessed by it. Western critics who once mocked Traoré now admitted his brilliance. One European analyst remarked, "He took the deadliest problem in his country and turned it into his greatest asset. That is not just politics. That is genius." By the end of year 3, Burkina Faso was no longer a fragile Sahelian nation at the mercy of pests. It had become a global powerhouse in venom, leather, and protein. And by the 7th year of the Serpent project, Burkina Faso was unrecognizable. A nation that once lived in fear of snakes now stood at the center of the world stage, led by a man who dared to see fortune in fangs.